Good afternoon and welcome. We're going to get started. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Elizabeth Bernhardt, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Executive Director of the Manufacturing Growth Alliance, or MGA. MGA is a statewide trade association headquartered in Southwest Michigan, and we are dedicated to championing, serving, and advocating for Michigan's small to medium-sized manufacturers. And we're really excited that you joined us today. We had a very broad audience joining us today. We even have some joining us from Alaska. So we're so glad that you found us. So just a few housekeeping items before we get started. So this event is being recorded and it will be shared out on our YouTube channel after it's been edited. And we will also be sharing this out over social media. So if you want to share this recording with some of your colleagues, you'll be able to do that. In addition, we will be sharing out the slides from today's event with all those who were registered. So you will get the slides in addition to the link to the YouTube recording. While we are going through the session, we ask that you submit your questions into the chat. And when we move into the Q&A portion of the chat, I will be reading your questions. In addition, if you would like to personally ask questions of our two presenters yourself, please raise your hand and then I can unmute you. We are scheduled to go until 4 o'clock today, 4 o'clock Eastern. So with that, I would like to introduce you to our two presenters. We are very excited to welcome Tim Spino. Tim is the Vice President of North American Contractor Link, and he is also the founder, president, and CEO of E2E Summit. He has worked closely with the construction and building trades with DeWalt Industrial Tools, then Cooper Busman, and now as a top executive, and then as a top executive for Milwaukee Electric Tool Corporation. He has held management positions in marketing, sales, plant management, purchasing, customer service, and demand creation. In addition, I would like to welcome you to Rod West. He is an external affairs technical team director for Schneider Electric USA. Rod has worked in the electrical industry for over 32 years, and he holds a total of 12 patents for various types of electrical equipment and components. And as you can see there, he chairs the board of directors for Whitewater Valley REMC. He is a NAFI certified fire and explosion investigator and a member of the International Association of Electrical Inspectors. And as you can see in his bio, he also holds many additional national leadership positions pertaining to electrical safety and standards. With that, gentlemen, welcome, and I turn it over to you.
Well, thanks a lot, Elizabeth, and thank you to the Manufacturing Growth Alliance for this opportunity. When I'm really excited, I'll be the moderator of the presentation and the topics today. But when we talk about subject matter experts, I'm just so pleased to be working here with Rod. When you talk about a subject matter expert related to NFPA-70E, arc flash safety and PPE, and NFPA-70B, he's a principal on the NFPA-70E committee, but also chairs the NFPA-70B. So we literally have a true subject matter expert. So Rod, thanks for joining us. Before we begin, I just want to introduce myself and who I'm with. We are a partner with the MGA Manufacturing Growth Alliance. My name is Tim Spino. I work with an organization called North American Contractor Link. Best way to explain to you all is we are a no-cost service for industrial plants. So we are a no-cost service where if you have contractor needs, whether it's capital projects or augmenting your maintenance personnel, small projects, really no project is too small or too big, but we just help source and connect you with the best contractors, the most ideal contractors for your needs. And again, we are a no-cost service to industrial facilities, and we just are very pleased to be able to talk to you this morning and or this afternoon, and take you through this. So, Rod, I'll let you take over the introduction of who Schneider Electric is and so forth.
Great, thank you, Tim, and thank you, Elizabeth. Many of you are probably already familiar with Schneider Electric. Those of you who are not, probably are familiar with our brands, Square D, APC, and several other brands that have been around for literally for decades. We have historically we produced the hardware that powers residential and commercial and industrial applications. And today that's transitioning. We still continue to produce the hardware, but we're combining that experience with software and digital solutions that's really going to enable the electrification of tomorrow's world. So happy to be here today and happy to discuss 70E and 70B.
Yeah, a lot of your equipment, a lot of your products are in these industrial plants for close to over 100 years. So this will be great. So let me take you through the agenda. We're just going to set the stage, talk about the importance of electrical safety, especially in industrial plants, and then Rob's going to go into a little bit more detail of the safety standards, NFPA-70E, and then really outlining some of the very significant new changes related to NFPA-70B. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how you get started. How can you make your company or facility compliant? And then we'll open up the Q&A. So we sent out a survey before this webinar just to kind of get a feel for the audience and what we were looking and what we were working with from an expectation standpoint. And it's pretty interesting. So we asked, do you have a facility-wide safety program? 97% said yes. And then do you have an electric specific safety program? And you can see quite a bit of difference there. But Rod, any comments on these answers, on what your first gut feel looking at these? Of any comments?
Well, I mean, just general observations, Tim. The chart on the left doesn't surprise me at all. I would expect that safety programs in general are very common. I'm a little bit surprised by the chart on the right. And as I look at that, I see about 2/3 of the respondents indicate that they have an electric specific program. Frankly, I would expect that in industrial settings, 2/3 or more, where they might have in-house qualified electrical workers. But in my experience, a lot of commercial sites contract their electrical work out, and they may not have that electric program. And more, even some of the industrial sites just can't staff that at that level. So I'm surprised to see it that high, to be honest.
Yeah. I was too, which I think talking about the new changes to the NFPA-70B will be an important topic. I'm just going to read this actually, because this is just something that we put together just to frame out, the high level lens that we're looking at today. So electrical safety at plants and facilities should always be a top concern for manufacturers, industrial facilities, whether at an existing facility or a new construction. An injury, incident, outage, or arc flash event in one of these systems or any of these systems can be disastrous for the entire facility and the community as a whole, all the stakeholders. So that's our purpose statement here. So what I'd like to do then is hand you the mic, if you will, more. Rod, hand you the mic to talk a little bit more deeper dive into NFPA 70E and 70B.
Okay, be happy to. So let's start with NFPA 70B, right? 70B, if you're not familiar with it, it is the title is the standard for electrical equipment maintenance, and it's been around a long time. It's been around since first published in 1975. So we're coming up on 50 years of 70B. Those of you that aren't familiar with it, it's probably because up until the previous edition, up until the 2019 edition, it was a recommended practice. And if you're not familiar with recommended practices, those documents, they don't contain any type of mandatory language. So they've got a lot of great information in them, but there's not a single requirement in a recommended practice. In fact, there can't be. Requirements are reserved for codes or standards, not in recommended practices. But with the release of the 2019 edition, NFPA extended our work cycle to help. They basically gave us an extra year to transition 70B from a recommended practice to a standard. And you might think that that's a kind of a small effort, but in reality, it was a huge undertaking, and it was a really active development cycle. I was excited to see the engagement by the public, and for an example, you can see on the slide there. If you're not familiar with the NFPA process, the public provides the input, the public provides comments. For this transition, we received over 700 public comments, but the previous edition for the 2019, that number, instead of being over 700, was less than 10. So the engagement was just overwhelming. And all of those public inputs and public comments are reviewed by a technical committee. There's, as you mentioned earlier, I chair, but I'm honored to serve with 41 members. And it's a great blend, a balanced committee of installers, maintainers, manufacturers like myself. But some of the kind of unique ones, you're used to seeing users and labor and enforcement involved, but insurance is involved in 70B as well. And I think that's noteworthy. Long story short, the 2023 edition came to be as a standard. It became effective last year in January, and we've actually already begun development of the next edition of the 2026. We met earlier this year to start reviewing the public inputs for what will end up being the 2026 edition. So the cycle starts all over right away. So sometimes I get the question, 70B, why does it matter? And what I'm trying to do, we've talked about the background, but let's just talk a little bit about why it matters. 70B as the standard for electrical equipment maintenance, probably the easiest way for me to explain it or to think about it, the value of maintenance is to think about the impacts of not performing maintenance, right? So if you look at on the slide, if you look at the two things on the left, clearly we'd all like to avoid downtime. We'd all like to avoid costly repairs, and in my opinion, that's even been more pronounced in the last couple of years with all of the supply chain challenges, right? Getting something back up and running simply is not as quick as it used to be. But another thing to consider, which I believe is even more important, is in the top right. It's safety. The safety impact should be at the top of our list, right? And I really believe that it is. Maintenance is a key part of that. If you expect your equipment to operate as intended, then you will interface with it in that manner. So it's really the two are tied together, and we'll talk more about that. Finally, in the lower right, energy efficiency, right? Yeah, I think it goes without saying that properly maintained equipment generally operates more efficiently. That's especially clear on equipment like an electric motor, for instance, right? If you've got a motor that's well maintained, you're going to use less energy than one that's not. But of all those things, to me, safety is at the top of the list. And really, there are only two national consensus standards that deal with safety and maintenance, and those are NFPA-70E and 70B. And when we think about those two, Tim, I think we've got a survey question coming up, and that was one of the questions that you asked about, right? Maybe on the next slide.
And I did want to ask right before we get into the survey question is, so when you are required a recommended practice versus a standard, do you feel that facilities or other jurisdiction having authorities and so forth, or owners and facility owners, do you feel that they start adopting these safety standards when they become a standard versus a recommended practice? Do you see more adoption because of this?
You do, and actually, in just a couple slides, I've got a little explanation of that. But absolutely, by transitioning to a standard, then it becomes adoptable. And I say that because then it has mandatory language. Because without it being a standard, there's no requirements. So you really can't enforce anything if there's no requirements. So yeah, it's absolutely the first step.
Yeah, and take a look at your initial thoughts, gut feel on the screen of, have you heard of NFPA-70E? I'm sure, I bet you if we would have said, have you ever heard of arc flash safety and PPE requirements, maybe there would have been a little bit more yeses there. But tell me your thoughts here on your initial feel and read on these surveys responses.
Sure. I didn't really do the background on 70E, but the reality is it came into being at about the same time. It was also in the 1970s. So the two documents are about the same vintage. So you might think that the answers would be the same, but I guess my impression is that I would expect the awareness for 70E to be higher. It is here. I might even think it's should be higher than it is. 70E has gotten a lot of press lately. It talks about the primary electrical hazards, shock and arc flash, but like you said, arc flash has gotten a lot of press. As I look at 70B, it's slightly behind, but today's webinar, it's just one of a lot of webinars out there, articles and some presentations that I'm aware of that are really promoting 70B. So I hope that those numbers will climb.
Yeah. Transitioning to this slide, when we were talking and prepping for this, Rod, you actually talked about something like this Trinity. If you could kind of explain a little bit of what you mean by that. Yeah,
absolutely. So, so on this slide, we decided to forego the animation, but if you kind of work around the pie chart with me, and starting in the upper left, the National Electrical Code, we're all familiar with that, right? I'm sure if we had asked that in the questions, the numbers would have been the highest for the NEC. Most of us are familiar with those installation requirements. But the NEC also has some information in there that relates to the condition of maintenance. It has some information in there that relates to electrical safety. So there's some little parts and pieces that either point to other documents or have some requirements contained in there. But that NEC is really focused largely on the installation. And so as you work around from that installation, now you think about the life cycle of the equipment, you get down to the bottom and you start interfacing with that equipment. So now you need safe work practices. And whether that's operation or whether that's maintenance, doesn't really matter. It's still all work practices. And, we've mentioned the arc flash and the shock. I think people's mind jumped to PPE on 70E, but it's so much more than that. So one of the things I want to highlight is the very bottom bullet in the 70E, that 70E requires you to put together an electrical safety program that has elements. And one of those elements is to assess the condition of maintenance. And think of how hard that was up until now. How do you determine the condition of maintenance? It's a requirement for my electrical safety program, but I don't know how to quantify it. I don't know what the minimum requirements are. Now enter the top piece, top right, NFPA-70B. Now you've got this missing piece of the puzzle, right? And it sort of creates the rest of the story, if you will. And it has those requirements. It has the maintenance program requirements that help you to establish a condition of maintenance. So now that it's transitioned from a recommended practice to a standard, you can use 70B to establish a condition of maintenance, which then you can use in your safety program. So it's a trinity in that all three pieces work together. And Tim, I've kind of got a bullseye right in the middle. And if you go to the next slide, I kind of expand on that just a little bit.
And yeah, Rod, I guess one of the things that I attribute to in terms of understanding this story is you don't, if you're a facility manager, if you're a facility owner, you don't have to recreate the wheel. Like you said, since 1975, over 50 years, close to 50 years of work and public process and a committee and so forth to create these standards. From a layman's standpoint, I would say don't recreate the wheel. It's right there. It is all right there that for you to implement, adopt, and use.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is. It is. They are. It's ready. I mean, it is truly a national consensus standard, and it takes. We talked about the balance on those committees. It takes a 2/3 supermajority, if you will, to change the document. So no one entity or viewpoint can really change a code or standard. It takes consensus. So absolutely, they're there for you. I mentioned the bullseye, right? And this is kind of my view, but I think it helps explain the chain, if you will. We're all familiar with OSHA. Also came about at about the same time, right? If you go back, it's been around 50 years or so. But the intent of OSHA is to create that safe and healthful working conditions for its workers. OSHA has expressly said that they view 70E as the primary consensus standard addressing electrical safety, electrical hazards. OSHA, to be clear, OSHA enforces its own regulations. OSHA does not necessarily enforce a particular line in 70E, but they do look to 70E as the guideline, the best practice, the national consensus standard on meeting the requirements, recognizing the hazards and dealing with them. So there is a tie there. As I mentioned a moment ago, 70E has that electrical safety program that wants to confer proper installation. So that's the code stuff, the NEC stuff, and the condition of maintenance. That's the 70B stuff. And so you start to bring that together, and it really becomes clear that in order to create that 70E program, you need to have a method to determine the electrical condition of maintenance. So that's that maintenance program. All of those are so interrelated, and at the end of the day, they're helping to form that safe working environment for people, right? The people that will interface with it or work on the equipment. All right.
I'm going to do the animation here, just so that we don't have to.
Yeah, that's fine. That's it. There was just one. So, but Tim, this one gets right to your question of earlier, right? So, two sides to this slide, right? If we look at the left, it's a little bit of a dated map. I grabbed a screenshot from March of this year, but the idea, you can get an updated version if you click the QR code at the bottom. But the concept here is that the NEC, the National Electrical Code, is really anything but. It's not national. It's adopted typically state by state, right? In some cases, municipalities. So you end up with this patchwork quilt. When a state adopts the newest edition of the NEC, they change colors. They may go from green to purple, for instance, depending on what edition that they adopt. But if you look across the country, they're not all standardized, right? There's all types of editions and enforcement taking place out there. And in some cases, like I said, municipalities have their own edition and their own requirements. But it is largely geographic driven. If you look on the right, it's very different for 70E and 70B. And the reason is those are typically not adopted by a geographic region, a state. They're actually adopted by employers or facility owners. And so what you end up with is, let's say a company XYZ decides that they're going to use NFPA-70E as their electrical safety blueprint, if you will, and they adopt it, and they're going to follow the requirements. Everywhere that company has a location suddenly changes color to I'm following the newest edition of 70E. Likewise with 70B. And so you, instead of having the patchwork, you end up with a peppering, right? It's kind of a shotgun approach of all of these different locations, which may be in multiple states, suddenly enforcing the requirements. And really, why would they do that? Well, I mean, the four bullets are there those are the drivers. They want to protect their employees, which I think would be all of us. They want to comply with the OSHA regulations that we mentioned, optimize their operations, and of course, reduce risk. I mentioned insurance is active on the technical committee. It wouldn't surprise me to see insurance requirements coming in the future that would look for evidence of compliance with 70B.
Now, would you see also maybe not just insurance requirements, but maybe insurance incentives?
Perhaps. Yeah. It's a good point, Tim. I don't know how that's going to materialize, but let's face it, the insurance industry is always out to reduce risk. And this is a method of doing that.
Do you ever see tier one manufacturers recommending or pushing or making these requirements to their tier two and suppliers down the chain to say, okay, if you are going to be a supplier to us, you're going to be a manufacturer to our manufacturing process or community. Do you ever see them?
I think the way I typically see it is not necessarily the supplier tier that you described, but very similar, the contractor. So if I am a large facility, let's say an industrial as an example, it could be a commercial as well. But I have adopted 70E, and that's our expectation. Then any contractor that comes in, I would want them to be knowledgeable of the requirements of the standard and follow them. So that relationship, absolutely, I see that. Yeah. And likewise with 70B.
Yeah, and that's actually a good point too, where we have a lot of, we take a look at the audience with Manufacturer Growth Alliance. This could also be, when you are subcontracting that work out to contractors, for them to understand, okay, what is your policy? What is your acumen? What is your experience related to NFPA-70E and NFPA-70B? It can help them, vet their supply base as well, and segment it, if you will.
For sure. I mean, think of how that helps you. I mean, if you are bidding multiple potential contractors, think of how that levels the playing field, right? If they're following the same standards.
So tell us about this the key concepts you put together.
Okay, so we've got a short webinar today. I simply don't have enough time to do a deep dive into 70B. That's clear, but there's just a handful of key concepts I wanted to highlight. So if you look at the top there, following an electrical maintenance program helps you to confidently determine what the condition of maintenance is. That condition of maintenance is, as I've mentioned several times, it's a requirement in electrical safety program, but really you can't have one without the other. So the output of the maintenance program is an input for the safety program. And that key concept, to me, that was the biggest thing I wanted to point out. Number two, there's no conflict. What does that mean? Well, if you look in 70B, I think it's in chapter 4, it's right up front that there's language that clearly states that 70B is not intended to supersede the manufacturer's instructions. So sometimes we get some confusion what to do. The standard is clear that the manufacturer's instructions are at the top of the hierarchy, top of the list. And really the third thing, 70B covers preventative maintenance, right? It's not repair, it's not installation, it's not a how-to manual for exchanging parts or anything like that. This is preventative maintenance, and basically throughout the document, it's broken out into 5 scopes of preventative maintenance work, right? That visual inspection, the cleaning, the lubrication, mechanical servicing, and electrical testing. Those 5 are repeated over and over for different types of equipment. In some cases, there's blank, right? You don't have a lubrication requirement on a transformer, for instance, where there's no moving parts, but the section is reserved and standardized throughout. So those are really the key concepts I wanted to cover. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as we move forward, this is really, it's kind of an abbreviated table of contents. So if you're not familiar with 70B, here's kind of an overview. The upfront stuff, those chapters 1 through 4 are the, just like all the NFPA documents, they're the administrative stuff, the definitions. I always highlight the definitions. If you don't read anything else, read the definitions of the terms, and then you'll understand the standard better. Chapter 5 is safety. It's the shortest standard in the book. And why is that? Because safety is addressed by 70E. And, we really point there. 6, 7, and 8, these are requirements that are not necessarily equipment related, but they're study related, single line diagrams. If you don't have a single line diagram of your facility, that's your map. If you don't have that, you have no idea where you're at in the system. You don't know how things interrelate. It's a requirement in 70B to have a single line diagram and have it up to date and have it accurate, right? So, and other electrical studies as well. Chapter 9 has maintenance intervals, criticality, and condition assessments, and that is general, but it applies to all of the following chapters, 10 through 36. And the way that's organized is each chapter addresses a specific type of equipment. There's a chapter for circuit breakers. There's a chapter for transformers. There's a chapter for all of the different types of equipment that were addressed by the standard, are identified in a chapter, and then they kind of refer back to chapter 9. And then the final line, the annexes. Annexes just always, they just contain the non-mandatory information. It's informative. There's no requirements in an annex, but it does help you understand what the requirements are trying to convey. So,
I think one of the things that, as I'm listening to you, is the 70B and it becoming a standard. One is, this becomes a wonderful resource for you to add and integrate if you are looking at a preventative maintenance plan. It allows you to, if you have a preventative maintenance plan and you're redoing it, it would be wonderful to be able to say, from an electrical equipment standpoint, you can steal from or use as examples of what is being provided from NFPA-70B. You don't have to do it yourself. And I would also say, it's a pretty large, exhaustive resource, and think about it to where you can target, and piecemeal, if you will, some of the information and resources. Don't try to eat the whole thing at once. Use it as a way to where it can augment certain areas of your business that you're looking, to update or create internally. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Yes. It's a great template. Some of those annexes have documents that are intended to be templates, right? For just your point, that you can adapt to your own specific installation. So absolutely.
Okay, good. Next. Okay, sir, do you have an electrical maintenance program? And do you perform your own maintenance or outsource your electrical maintenance to another company? What's your thoughts here, Rod, just based on these answers here?
So, do you have an electrical maintenance program? I think so this question's a little different than the previous slides, right? An electrical maintenance program, yeah, I would expect that the 2/3 or even more would. So that doesn't surprise me at all. Do you perform your own maintenance or outsource? Yeah, I think it's a split. And what the numbers are, it probably varies by industry, by geography, and frankly, it probably varies by time and specialty, right? You may outsource a portion of it. Maybe you outsource the medium voltage, high voltage stuff and work on the low voltage stuff, your own, but you don't know, because of resources, you don't know which way to answer the question, so you pick one, right? But yeah, I would expect a blend like we see.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things I would say about this is I think more and more people, in my anecdotal experience, are outsourcing a lot more of their maintenance more and more. And the one benefit to that is you can get subject matter experts and actually ask them to be versed in NFPA-70B, NFPA-70E, where you don't have to be an expert as a facility owner. You don't have to be the expert in everything. You hire out that expertise so that you have that higher level of safety and knowledge base to where that's kind of the value and service they bring. So actually, which actually kind of brings us to the next point is, okay, where would someone at the audience go from here? What making your company compliant? What suggestion and advice do you have?
So I've actually got a couple of slides, and this is the first one. And I really struggled. I don't want to put too much information on a slide, but there was another key concept that I didn't address a couple slides ago that I wanted to highlight. And what that is if you look up there, I've got my little calendar icon. Really, the default in 70B is to have a frequency that is calendar based. So it's maybe that duration changes, right? But depending on the criticality or the condition of the equipment or different factors like that, the type of equipment, but it's calendar based. There is an allowance though in 70B in Chapter 9, and I actually put in quotes the actual permissions that permit things like continuous monitoring and predictive techniques. And you can kind of see this is my take on establishing those preventative maintenance, intervals. Obviously, at the bottom is no maintenance, and I suppose there's situations out there where that occurs. But really, the good is the default in 70B. That's where you're performing preventative maintenance, and it's on some predetermined interval. But in my opinion, the better and the best are methods that you can focus those efforts rather than being on a set clock, right? You can really focus your maintenance efforts where it's needed and when it's needed. So if you monitor the equipment, it might take that interval and either extend it, which is what we would all hope for, but it may also reduce the interval, right? And tell you need maintenance sooner than expected. So I think that better best is a great place to focus your efforts and take the maintenance to that next level, especially if you're creating actually either way, if you're starting from zero or if you're trying to evolve your existing program, I think that's a good way to help you free up some resources and focus your efforts, where they have the best bang for the buck.
Yeah, and Rod, I also think it would be, not all pieces of equipment are equal in terms of date of installation, age, what type of process they handle and protect, but also how much are they exposed to people and the people in the plant and so forth. So I also think there could be a mix of, you certainly would, everybody would love to have the best for every piece of equipment in the plant, but maybe it's a portfolio approach to say, okay, we're going to make sure that we have the best or the better approach for the key pieces of equipment that we feel just, create a sense of risk that we want to be predictive and preventative versus reactive.
Yeah, absolutely. The criticality. I mean, if I had to wrap all that into one word, Tim, it would be criticality. And certainly some pieces of the system are more critical than others. It may be higher up on the one line. It may be process based, but absolutely.
Yep.
All right. So there's a lot of words here. I'm not going to try and clear all of this, but the contents of this slide, they're really not explicitly stated in 70B, but what I'm trying to do is give some sort of a kind of a quick start guide, right? To help you get started in creating your own maintenance program. And to me, it all starts with up in number one, to conduct that assessment, to know what you've got. You've got to know what your systems are. You've got to have an analysis of their age, their maintenance history, their criticality. Just just having that inventory is so important. And really wrapped up into that, there's a lot more than what's contained there. But create that single line diagram and all of this. If you need really one coordinator, one electrical maintenance program coordinator to drive this, and that's where it all starts. But then as you proceed down, and like I said, I'm not going to clear all of these, but you're going to end up identifying which things are higher on the priority. To your point just a moment ago, the criticality, and then figure out your tasks and the schedules and establishing the procedures. All of that is very custom for your particular facility. And then at the end, have some sort of a tracking facility, because you or system. You need to be able to not only track it so you know when to do the maintenance the next time, but you also need to be able to convey that information to the people that need it. Remember, this is an input to the electrical safety program, and so there has to be a way to track the maintenance and follow it.
I think what you provided them too, Rod, is not just the electrical safety, electrical equipment. This is a great way to get started for a lot of different safety and a lot of different process types of elements that the facility managers deal with day in and day out. I think it's a great checklist to get them started. Very applicable to a lot of things beyond just electrical maintenance and electrical safety.
Thank you. Thanks, Tim. And really, right, here, this is kind of a shameless plug for a document, but the reality is it's a free download. It's an e-guide that contains a lot of the things you just saw on the checklist, only expanded out a little bit more. So, users can download that, they can review it, decide if it fits or what they want to do. But this guide is helpful. It is not the standard, to be clear, but it helps you comply with the standard and understand what the requirements are.
That's great. I just checked. I just clicked on the QR code, and it's very, very informative and goes into more detail than we were able to do today. Before we open it up to questions, any last comments at all, Rod? Any thoughts on parting kind of concepts? Or I think you did a wonderful job outlining something that already the survey said not many people knew about, NFPA-70B. And maybe we'll just do this. Let's go to questions and then have some parting thoughts at the end. So,
sure.
Elizabeth, I'll probably you've been monitoring the chat area. Any questions that we can address?
Yeah, thank you. Great conversation. So, a couple of questions. What if there is a conflict between the instructions and 70B?
So, I kind of touched on this, and maybe I could have expanded more, but 70B it's very clear on the relationship between the manufacturer's instructions and the requirements in 70B. And basically, as I said, there's that hierarchy that says the standard's not intended to duplicate or supersede those instructions. So to me, what that means is, first and foremost, for your maintenance requirements, look at the manufacturer's instructions, follow the manufacturer's instructions. But if and maybe this is what the questioner is getting at. If you review the standard, you're going to see, remember I had the 5 categories. It may occur that you've got a category that the instructions simply are silent on. They don't tell you how to visually inspect, for instance, or, if there's nothing on lubrication. You pick one of those topics. Then if there's nothing in the instructions, then I would say that you go to 70B and fill in the blanks, if you will. So if there's nothing in the instructions, absolutely follow what's in the absence of those instructions, follow what's in 70B. So you might end up with a merged maintenance program combined of the two, if that makes sense.
Thank you. You also mentioned as a first step that a manufacturer can start with an assessment. Can you speak more to these assessments and how a manufacturer would find one?
So, yeah, the assessment is really something that it would be obviously site specific, but the assessment would be sort of an inventory, if you will, where you go out and from the service point down, you inventory what the equipment is. Maybe you'll identify types, ratings, information like that. Make sure that it's on the one line, that the one line is up to date. So that assessment is physically based, but it also it deals with your own risk assessment of how important that is, that particular component or system is. So, for instance, as you get down, you might think that the service entrance is the most critical in the facility, and probably is, right? If you lose it, you lose everything. But as you work your way down, you might have other very critical parts and pieces of your electrical system that you really want to focus some maintenance effort and maybe start there on. And I don't want to say ignore, but as a second level, look at subsystems. So
I'd like to add to that too. I have seen some electrical contractors already, because of NFPA-70B becoming that standard, starting to offer these assessments as a service. And it depends on the contractor. Sometimes it would be, hey, we'll do an assessment, no cost assessment, to kind of tell you where you are. Or there are some people that will charge you based on the size of your plant and so forth. But I see assessments as a service for 70B becoming something that we're going to see more of. Do you agree, Rod?
Yeah, absolutely. And it will relate to, as you mentioned, the 70B, but I think it will also identify potential safety concerns as well, right? If let's say a piece of equipment is rated with a short circuit current rating of X, but what's really available exceeds that, things like, situations like that, they're identified in those assessments. So there's a tie there as well.
So, Rob, let's talk for a moment about Michigan's smallest of manufacturers. And of course, that is the target audience for MGA. I would imagine if they're listening to this, they might be a little bit overwhelmed. It's small manufacturers have a lot on their plate. And what you may not know about MGA is we help manufacturers with their Industry 4.0 technology adoption. And many times in that technology adoption, things stall because they are just so overwhelmed. And so walk us through how a very small enterprise might tackle this. I mean, as we talked about before, what are the critical first steps they must take?
You're right, Elizabeth. It's not going to materialize overnight, right? You're not going to create an electrical maintenance program tonight and have it tomorrow. But if you're going to focus, I guess, in my opinion, the first thing you need to do is to designate somebody as that electrical maintenance program coordinator, and get them trained. Get them trained in the standard and the requirements that are there. And then they can make that decision on what resources they're going to need to create that maintenance program, right? If they don't have it in-house, maybe they will partner with a contractor. If they do have it in-house, then they can develop it and put the policies and the procedures in place to make it a reality. But I think you need that single point of contact as a start. And physically, I mean, besides the people, right? It all starts with people. But the second thing is to get that single line diagram up to date. And it's surprising how many single line diagrams existed at a point in time, but are simply not maintained. They're not modified as the system evolves. But that is so important. And no matter who does the work, they're going to come back and look for that single line diagram. And let's face it, if I'm just doing lockout, I need to know what this equipment is fed by. And without a single line, how do I know, right? So those two pieces would be the things that I would focus on. And that's tangible, right? That's a concrete, doable task to appoint somebody that you can train and then get some of the real basics information in line.
And I think we're going to get into this piece next is, because I know we're at the end, but is they could probably, I'm sure, call Schneider or contact Schneider to say, hey, I need help here. I just attended a webinar. Is there someone I can talk to talk through my facility's situation? And I think we're probably getting into where that is, right? A little bit of a contact. But is there a place where they could go within Schneider to be able to ask those questions?
There is, and to be clear, I see we're sharing my email. I am not in sales. Okay, I am not. I'm probably not in your physical location or anywhere near you, but absolutely contact your local representative. If it's Schneider, that's great. If it's someone else that you work with, that's understandable too. But I think most of the major manufacturers and service providers do offer this service. I know that we do, and really, it's a great first place to start.
Yeah, and I would do a shameless plug for North American Contractor Link. I think that's where we make where we make that's our value point. Is all this stuff is very daunting. There's a lot of stuff out there. Even just trying to find ideal vetted contractors that bid your work within a facility. We kind of like to be the easy button or the middle person to be able to connect you with those resources. So, you could reach out to me as well if you wanted to know more about that. Because essentially, if you're in Portland, Maine, or if you're in Portland, Oregon, but here, obviously, you're going to be most likely in Michigan. The resources are going to be different, and we can tailor that and customize it to your situation, your geography, and kind of where to start. So that's how we provide our value at North American Contractor Link, is to make that connection, be your easy button to get you connected with the right contractors and subject matter experts.
Great, Tim. Thank you. I want to take a moment to give everybody some information about some upcoming events that MGA is hosting. And you can find all of these events on our webpage. And I just entered that into the chat. But on October 1st, we are hosting Varnum Law and HR Collaborative to talk about changes to employment and labor laws happening at the federal and state level, including some action steps you need to take now to remain compliant as we move into 2025. That is October the 1st. It's an hour-long webinar. On October the 24th, we are having an event called Passing the Torch, Building a Business Your Kids Won't Want to Run From. And this features a local manufacturer called Hibschman Screw Machine and their pathway for their long-term growth, including their leveraging ProShop ERP. We also, MGA is hosting CEO roundtables called Peerspectives, CEO roundtables for the emerging second stager. We'd love to have you participate. And again, you can find those links, the link to that in the chat. With that, Rodney and Tim, some final words for you.
Well, Rod, I just want to say thank you. I would tell you, I think when we first started to talk about this, having, one of the most, let me just go right to it. Like the LeBron James of electrical safety, NFPA-70B and 70E. You are, probably one of the most versed person that I've met in these subjects. So I just want to say thank you so much for being a part of this, sharing your expertise with us, and being part of this program. And want to thank MGA and Elizabeth as well.
Great. Well, thank you, Tim. I've never been compared to LeBron before, but I appreciate the compliment, and I appreciate the opportunity to participate today. And I really do want to spread the word about the benefits of 70E and 70B. So I hope we've made some advancements there. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone.